Okay, class. This is our PowerPoint over food chains and food webs. We've learned a lot of these things already, but we're just kind of going over some of the same things we've already learned and looking at how they specifically apply to food chains and food webs. And then you're going to use a food chain later today from an environment of your choice to illustrate that 10% principle that we learned about in our LOL diagrams. And so what I'll do is I'll give you an example of that. But before we do that, let's learn about food chains again. Food chains illustrate the order that animals consume plants or other animals. It consists of linear links. Remember those linear links we went over that you hopefully got correct in your quiz today. In a food web, starting with plants and ending with animals that consume other animals. So the food chain is one linear part of the food web. The food web is a collection of food chains interconnected from the same ecosystem. So interconnected will be that main word that we're focusing on. And within a food chain, there are consumers, organisms that feed on plants or other animals, which have three types, a vocab word that you use today. There's producers, organisms that make their own food, usually at the bottom of our energy pyramid, and they are um, part of the food chain, particularly usually the beginner. And then there are also decomposers, which eat decaying plant and animal matter, and they are not always visible in our food chains. It just depends. They typically are recycling energy in food chains. This is an example of a food chain. And so the question is, what do all food chains have in common? What important words are being used? How do you read a food chain? So we see flow of energy. That's really the key. So the arrows in the food chain are pointing upward as the energy flows, right? And so it's produced in this phytoplankton, which is kind of like floating small microorganisms that actually use photosynthesis, and they're consumed by zooplankton. This zooplankton is consumed by small fish, which are consumed by the mackerel, which are consumed by the snapper, which then is consumed by a large shark or a predator. So this is a simple example of a food chain, and each arrow represents a flow of energy. So we read a food chain by understanding, that the arrows point in the direction of the energy. We don't point down to what is eaten or consumed, we point up towards the top of the chain as the energy flows. So when we look at a food chain, this one even includes the sun, showing the source of energy, although we are talking about chemical energy, which begins in the grass. So our producer is the grass here that makes its own food, produces energy. The mouse consumes grass and gains 10% of the original energy for itself. And then when the mouse uses 90% of that to survive, a snake will consume the mouse, and 1% of the original total energy will be found in the snake population, which again will use 90% of that to function and eventually will be consumed by the hawk, which is our apex predator. The arrows point in the flow of energy up the food chain. So this is another example, animals from another environment. So that's kind of leading into what your activity will be. This is another kind of environment we're looking at here. And so what do these have in common? Again, what do you see? We're seeing these arrows continuing to point up the chain, meaning the flow of energy is going towards the top, right? You'll notice that there's a producer or a plant at the beginning. Typically, animals will get larger as they move up the food chain, right? And so leaves are consumed by caterpillars. Again, they get 10% of the original energy found in our producers. 90% of that's used to live. Chameleons consume the butterfly or caterpillar itself and will get percent of that energy, which will be passed on to the snake. And then 90% of that energy is used by a snake, and the mongoose will get an even smaller percentage of that. So again, energy is flowing in the direction of the arrows. These are organisms in a different environment, just showing that the environment doesn't matter when we look at food chains. Food chains are based on what consumes what and where the energy flows. Here's another example here, very similar to what we've seen. This one includes a decomposer. So you'll notice the decomposer will recycle whatever energy is left in living organisms as they die back into producers through the soil and nutrients. So what you see here is even an allusion to sunlight, water, CO2, nutrients. So are all these energies being stored in producers, recycled through them? Grasshopper gets 10%. Grasshoppers consume. Snake gets, again, 1% of the original. Snake gets consumed. Hawk gets 0.1% of that. So remember that the energy is losing. Now we have a food web, and we have different food chains. So let's look at however many food chains can we make. How many can we make? Well, here's the grass. It's a producer. So we got grass to rabbits to foxes, right? We got carrots to rabbits to foxes. That's 2. We got grass to grasshoppers to owls. That's 3. Grass to grasshoppers to birds to foxes. That's 4. Okay. And then we got grains to mice to owls. 5. Grains to grasshoppers to owls. 6. Grains to birds to foxes. 7. Grains to grasshoppers to birds to foxes. That's 8. And I think that's where we're going to end up ending. So if you find more than that, more power to you. But again, just looking at a food web, you can see how you can have multiple food chains in a food web. Let's try this one here. A lot more organisms here. How many food chains can you find here? Seaweed to crab to squid to elephant, seal to killer whale. That's 1. Seaweed, crab, squid, penguin, killer whale. That's 2. Seaweed, crab, squid, penguin, leopard seal, killer whale. That's 3. Seaweed, crab, squid, penguin, leopard. Okay, we stopped there. So we're at 3. Still 3. Phytoplankton, krill, blue whale, 4. Phytoplankton, krill, fish, leopard seal, killer whale, 5. Phytoplankton, zooplankton, fish, leopard seal, killer whale, 6. Phytoplankton, zooplankton, fish, seagull, leopard seal, killer whale, 7. So I have 7 there. 1, 2, 3, 3, and then 5, 3, 6, 7. Yep, I have 7. So pretty cool how you can count so many. All right, and then here's this last one. Again, we're kind of doing that same thing. Start with the producer always. So that's phytoplankton. We got 3 past the start one. So we got phytoplankton, mayfly, frog, snake, right? That's 1. Phytoplankton, mayfly, salamander, snake. That's 2. Phytoplankton, mayfly, salamander, bald eagle. That's 3. Phytoplankton, mayfly, trout, bald eagle. That's 4. Phytoplankton, mayfly, trout, human. That's 5. Phytoplankton, trout, human. 6. Phytoplankton, trout, bald eagle. 7. Phytoplankton, dragonfly, frog, snake. 8. Phytoplankton, dragonfly, salamander, snake. 9. Phytoplankton, dragonfly, salamander, bald eagle. 10. Phytoplankton, dragonfly, trout, bald eagle. 11. Phytoplankton, dragonfly, trout, human. 12. And then I think I missed one. I think it was phytoplankton, mayfly, salamander, bald eagle. 13. So I think there's 13 here, maybe more. See how many you can find. Regardless, what you can see is that a food chain is a part of a food web, and there are many, 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 many food chains within a food web. So they're very interconnected. And so that's kind of the basis for today, is really hammering food chains. Your next video is going to talk to you about how to apply the 10% rule to a food chain in an ecosystem. And then your assignment will be to be able to do that.